Dear listeners, this is Ihab, Technical Director of the Sumud podcast. This episode discusses trauma, mental health struggles, and sexual violence, which may be triggering. Please prioritize your well-being. If you need support, you're not alone. Reach out to a trusted friend, therapist, or support organization. Thank you for your listenership.
When we speak up for Palestine, when we speak up against the occupation, when we speak out against the devastation and destruction that has happened to the people of Gaza, we're not just speaking out for those people who are there right now. We're speaking out for the generations and the legacies that's coming behind them. As you fight for Gaza, you're fighting for Black folks. Our struggles are interconnected.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
On this episode of the Sumud podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify Cori Bush. Representative Bush is more than a former Congresswoman. She's a movement, a voice for the unheard, and a relentless advocate for justice. As the first Black woman to represent Missouri in Congress, she redefined public service by centering the struggles of everyday people, not from a place of privilege, but from lived experience. A wife, mother, nurse, and organizer, she didn't enter politics through the usual path. She was propelled by necessity. From Ferguson to Congress, she has turned activism into action, ensuring voices too often ignored, whether in Missouri or Palestine, are heard.
We are your hosts, Hasan and Zaina Ashrawi. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you watch or listen, and follow us on social media either at Sumud Pod or at Sumud Podcast. Welcome, Congresswoman. It is such an honor to have you here. Truly, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's been uplifting to see someone like you representing so much in Congress, and you gave us so much hope, so much determination to continue the fight. As an activist, I speak as a Palestinian as well. So honestly, having you here is much bigger than just an interview for us. I think it's a conversation with family. So again,
thank you. Yes, I like that.
Yeah, and I want to echo that. I don't know if you remember, but when you gave a talk at Busboys and Poets, I said the same thing and I thanked you.
Yeah.
And I hope this conversation today will help our listeners learn how to better support you going forward and how we can support your future initiatives, because you did stand up for us and we appreciate it. As my son will say, she's a real one. You're a real one.
Oh.
I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So having you here is such an honor, as we were saying just now. And we know so much about your public persona, but let's talk a little bit about Cori Bush, the child. Tell us about your childhood, where you grew up, siblings, family. How did Cori Bush start?
Yeah, so I started out in the city of St. Louis, and we lived in I believe it was like a 4-family flat or something like that initially, and then moved a few times, and my dad eventually moved us to a municipality within St. Louis County in Missouri, and that's where I spent most of my childhood. I am the middle child. I have an older brother and a younger sister. Both of my parents worked for a living. My mother was a computer analyst. My dad was a meat cutter for around 20 years before he went in to work for a supportive community agency type deal. But my dad, I've heard so many stories of people talking about what they would do with their parents, or you think about what people say they do with their parents. Time with my dad was, if we're watching TV, we're watching Roots. We're watching Eyes on the Prize, learning about the civil rights movement. We were watching movies like that. He wanted us to watch movies and TV shows that gave us a picture of Black history, which is also U.S. history. So that was my growing up. If there were pictures on the wall, it was Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks. It was the great kings and queens of Africa, big, huge poster. That's how my dad taught us. He taught me from an early age that people aren't going to treat you the same because of the color of your skin, but love yourself anyway. You are beautiful. You are excellent. Be a leader. My dad, I was a kid, and my dad would tell me every morning, my siblings can attest to this. My dad told us, you are a leader and not a follower, and you will be accountable and responsible. And we grew up with that. And my dad went into politics when I was about 10 years old. And I had no idea where that was going to take any of us. All I knew was I was 10 years old and my dad said, "Hey, go with me and carry these pieces of paper." I'm like, "Okay, Dad." I ended up knocking doors with him, and he was like, when they come to the door, just say, "Would you vote for my dad?" and hand them the piece of paper. And my dad would stand way back over near the curb to wait for them to say yes. But anyway, so I spent my childhood learning politics. I spent my childhood, or at least my youth, working every area of a campaign that there is. So from the time I was 10 up to 18, my extra time was helping my dad campaign and his friends campaign.
Did you see yourself ever running, or did you see yourself more of an activist, or was this a lifelong dream to be an elected official, or was it more grassroots with the people?
Absolutely none of that. I actually, around 18, told my dad, I actually said these words to him: "I will never go into politics." That was what I told him. And it was because I saw my dad, someone who gave his whole heart to the community. If my dad saw someone in the neighborhood that he thought might have slept outside that night, or some kids who looked like they might have been like sent home from school and didn't have a way home, or if he saw someone in need, he was going to help right then and there. And I remember at one point I was just getting so frustrated because I wanted perfect attendance. And my dad would stop if he saw someone and, "Oh, let me pick this person up and take them to go get food." And I'm thinking, I was so in my own head, kid, just thinking, "No, I need to get to school on time. Take them after you. You drop me off at school first." I didn't understand at the time, but what was happening is seeds were being sown. And people have come back, adults have come back to my dad through the years and said, "It's because of you that I was able to take care of my family. It's because you helped me get a job." And so I learned such an example from my dad. And my mom was always the one to nurture us. We saw her work a full-time job and still come home and take care of 3 children while my dad worked the evening shift. But no, I didn't want to do politics. I was actually a disruptor, I guess, for my dad. And I was the one who was like, "Shh, be quiet, don't talk." Because I didn't like injustice anywhere at the time. I just didn't understand it. But let me say this. I went to a great high school called Cardinal Ritter College Prep in St. Louis, where we learned about what it was like to stand up against injustice. It was part of our curriculum. Be who you are, be authentically yourself. It's great to be a Black woman in this country. You don't have to shrink so that other people can feel great. So I attribute a lot of who I am now just to all of those experiences. I only thought I would be a nurse. It was like, I'm going to go be a nurse one day. My dad, his thing was, from the time I was 11, he would say, "You are going to go to Washington, D.C. You are going to be the U.S. Attorney General, but you're going to go to college at Howard University." And so I'm like, "Okay, Dad," I can look back now and say, well, I ended up in Washington.
And so you said you wanted to be a nurse, and you've known that throughout. So after graduating high school, you
Yes,
went into nursing?
I took a detour, and I was a candy striper. I don't think they have those anymore. I was a candy striper. I worked volunteer as a kid because in my parents' house, during the summer, up to 12, we did day camp, summer camp, and then after that, you had to go to work. So we volunteered during the summer. You can't stay at home on the couch. So I was a candy striper, and that's where I saw my first Black nurse woman. And I was like, "What is she doing?" And it just opened up a new world to me. Even though both of my grandmothers were in nursing, I would see them in the white hat and the white dress and the white shoes, the white stockings, but I never saw them working. So I didn't know what they were doing. But I saw that and was like, I got to do that. After high school, I experienced something during high school that changed my life. The racism that I endured before I went to Cardinal Ritter College Prep was so tremendous. I entered a school as the number one student, and it was a predominantly white school, and it was less than a handful of Black children or minority children at all in the school. And I remember I took the entrance exam, and I was told that I scored number one on the entrance exam, but they told me that I only scored number one because I cheated. So they made me go back and retest. And when I retested, I tested even higher. So I still ended up the number one student entering the school, but the N word would be spray painted on my locker. I was absolutely mistreated by students and staff. It was a very terrible time. And so my grades dropped. First time in my life, I didn't have all A's. My dad pulled me out and I went to Cardinal Ritter. It took a long time for me to pull myself together. So by the time I graduated, I just didn't care about life. And I went into a very bad time. That's where people know my history. That's where the sexual assault and things, that's where that started to happen. I just spun out. And so it was later, after I got my life together, that I became a nurse.
That's powerful. During that period of depression and the anxiety that you were facing, which most of us in one form or another go through that, depending on our various backgrounds and how we're treated within our communities, right? What's the biggest takeaway from that experience that you would say to the younger Cori Bush? If you could go back in time and say, hey, look, heads up, this is going to happen, and here's the playbook.
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I would have told my dad send me to Carnarita first instead of me even going to that other school. But if I had to go to that other school, I would say hold your head up. Like, your dad taught you that you are amazing. He taught you that you're great. He taught you that you're strong. Hold your back up. This was not for you, but the next place is. So be all you can be, excel and grow. And I would have asked for help. I didn't ask for help because I thought that I did something wrong, because I felt like I wasn't strong enough to handle what was happening to me. And I didn't like feeling like I wasn't strong enough to deal with it. But I was being terrorized. It wasn't just a few things here and there. It was daily being terrorized at my school, and for lack of a better word. So I would tell myself, it'll get better, but you just, like, you gotta throw your great boo and push forward.
I thought you were going to say you're going to be future president of the United States. I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm going to say that a couple more times. I hope you don't mind. Yeah. So talk about that experience in school a little bit more, though, because one would usually say, oh, why didn't you tell the teacher? Or why didn't you speak up?
Yeah.
Many times the teachers don't support, right? There was actually a case, I can't remember what state it was in, where a kid asked to move his seat, and the teacher said something to the extent of, I don't negotiate with terrorists. And I think this person was in 6th grade. This is recent.
Gosh.
So that just takes me back to my early days as well, as where the teachers weren't very supportive. Were they supportive at all with you, or were they part of the problem?
Absolutely not. They were part of the problem. They were the biggest part of the problem. I remember turning in homework, turning in assignments, and literally one instance, I literally handed my essay to the teacher, and the teacher took it and said, why didn't you turn in your essay? It was like, that's it. And so I would get Fs where Fs were not deserved. I would be called out in class. They would say things like, such and such, can you answer this question? Because we know Cori can't answer the question. Would you answer the question? Things like that. Or they would call on me and ask me a question, and I would answer it. And then they would just say, oh, look, she's being a goody two shoes. Nobody likes a goody two shoes. I was put out of class for the first time in my life because I challenged the teacher I felt gave the incorrect answer. And I was like, that's not right. That's not true. And I wasn't disrespectful. I just raised my hand. Hey, I said what it really was. And he put me out. He didn't put me out of class. He put me out of the full class. Like, I couldn't come back for the rest of the semester. And so anyway, I just went through so much. The teachers would laugh at the students as they would do things to me. My lockers full of shaving cream, so all of my work and my books, and like, it was just thing after thing every day. I would get tripped down the hallway, but the one thing about that, you put your hands on me, like, that was an issue. But I'll stop there. But it was rough. And the thing is, I was 14. I was a kid. I was just trying to excel in school. I was just trying to be the best Cori. I was trying to make my parents proud. I didn't know how to manage that on top of trying to excel. I needed to be the A. I needed to be the valedictorian. That was my focus.
Yeah. How do you go from a teacher, essentially, you worked for a school initially, then you went into nursing, and then now you're this badass congresswoman? Like, do you look, I think the real question is, are your parents still around, by the way?
Yes.
What do they say to you? Do they say, I knew it? Or do they say, wow?
They say both. So my mom says, I knew it when you first came out. So I was born black and blue with the cord wrapped around my neck. I was dying, actually, when I was born. And my mom said that when I came out, she took one look at me and she said, I looked at her and I rolled my eyes. She knew at that moment that I was going to be somebody. But because I spiraled and went a different way, when all of my grades tanked, I couldn't go to college because I didn't have enough money. So I was turned down. I went through so much that my parents at one point just thought that it was just going to be hard for me to recover. I ended up being unhoused. I went through a series of changes with abuse. I ended up the victim of sexual assault multiple times. I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't giving boundaries to make sure that others treated me properly. I was just in a very depressed state. And so it was through that, though. It was through those experiences when I look back on not only the sexual assaults, but I look at how I ended up in the position where these guys were able to take advantage of me and to actually take from me. I look at how I got there, but I also look at how I got out. When I think about that, when I think about being left for dead, an intimate partner at one point, he was very abusive, but he thought he choked me to death. He choked me for so long. I'll never forget before I blacked out. I just remember looking up at him as I was trying to fight him, and he was foaming at the mouth. Like he was so angry and it was so vicious that he was foaming at the mouth. And then I blacked out and he thought that he had killed me. So he left. And I think I woke up the next day. I don't know how, I don't remember how much time passed, but I did wake up. But I look back at all of that and I think about how that's where my faith comes in. My God didn't leave me there. I was able to get help. People showed up for me. Someone came in and just kept speaking life to me, like just kept speaking to me. Cori, you're better than this. You have so much to give to the world. Like just kept just imparting to me, even though I didn't want to hear it. They just kept speaking these things into me. And then one day something happened and my life changed. But a lot of it came with me realizing my own worth.
I think there is no way to put a number or anything on your worth and what you've done for society.
Thank you.
I just want to reiterate that. If I may, I know, again, this is sensitive and the topic of sexual assault, you had mentioned that you experienced sexual assault twice. Was one of those experiences in high school, just to make sure I understand, and then one later on?
One was immediately following high school. It was the summer I had just graduated and it happened like a month later. And it was someone I was supposed to look up to and respect. You just never think like that this type of thing will happen to you. And I was so young. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was saying. I remember I met this person on a church trip. This was a church trip because I grew up in the church. I was a church girl. We went on this trip every single year. I was about to turn 18. I was 17. Every year I had gone on this trip and this person was a leader. And I just remember there was some, oh, he's cute. Oh, she's cute. That type of thing. And he just said to me, it was as innocent as, hey, you want to come and hang out today? Yeah, yeah, it's fine. You can, yeah, we can hang out. What do you want to do? I'll just come by. I'll come by your room when we finish working. Oh, okay, great. And I didn't think anything of it because we were all in a hotel. And that's what everybody did. You would go to each other's rooms and go order food and hang out, or we would at least meet up in each other's rooms. So that was nothing. But what was strange was he ended up coming so late. It was like midnight or something when he finally came knocking on my door. But I was like, it's fine. My friend is in here. I didn't have a private room. Okay, fine. Come on in. And he walked in and he walked in and there was not even a conversation. He just walked in and like my friend was sleeping in the next bed. It was a double room. She was sleeping in that bed and he just walked in, pushed me over to the bed. And I just remember thinking at the time, what is happening? Why is he pushing me to the bed? I just remember just wondering, what is happening? Did I say something that said that I wanted to do this? And then so I just thought that like I did something to make this person think that this is what I wanted. And it couldn't have been further from the truth because I didn't. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you had to go through this. Usually when people think about sexual assault, it's usually why did she go there or why did they do this? And it's almost always blaming the woman. And it happens, as you are describing, in such normal, quote unquote, circumstances that you would never expect. And then you internalize as you were talking, and it definitely resonates with so many people who have gone through this. And you are an example of it gets better. You are an example of taking your own life into your own hands and leading and serving as an example to others. After that assault, How did that affect you moving forward? Did you reach out to someone and speak to them immediately after? You had mentioned that you spoke to people, helped you out to immediately after, but then the longer term after, how did that work out? How did the mental health aspect of it come about?
It was even worse. And initially, I didn't realize it was sexual assault until just a few years ago when the Dobbs decision came down, when Roe v. Wade was overturned. It was in that moment when I was thinking about how I could stand up for bodily autonomy that I realized I walked through that situation in my head and I was like, wait a minute. Because I carried that I did something wrong that led to this happening to me. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell them that's what happened. My mom ended up knowing, of course, later because I got pregnant out of that situation. I just went into a very deep, dark place. And there was this woman, she was a spiritual mother for me. She was a minister in the church. And I remember she came up to me one day and she said, "What has happened to you? You are like the walking dead." And it was when she said that, like, something like shook me. Wait a minute. Like, I have turned into this like zombie walking. I didn't care about anything. I didn't care about anyone. I didn't care about who I hurt. I didn't care about who I helped. I didn't care about what I looked like. I was just existing. And so that helped to wake me up. And I started to work for a company. It was actually a Christian preschool, and I ended up working there for the next 10 years. But it was at that Christian preschool that I found my faith. Even though I grew up in the church, I still felt far from it. It was when I went to that place that I met this woman who is the one that started to speak into me. I ended up in that abusive relationship that I spoke about during this time. I would show up to work beaten and bruised. I would show up to work with ripped clothing. I would show up like I was really going through a lot. And so her and the owners of that preschool, they really spoke life into me. And that really helped me to stand strong because the other thing was I felt like I hurt my parents so much that I couldn't go to them. I didn't want to disappoint them more, like seeing my mess, seeing how I couldn't get out of this relationship with this jerk. And so I couldn't go to them. And so instead, this person came to me and saw beyond my faults and just helped change my life.
Shout out to that person
Yeah.
who was there for you.
Yeah.
So what message would you have for individuals? Obviously, sexual assault, unfortunately, occurs on almost a daily basis, multiple times throughout the nation. What is your advice for those individuals that have experienced it and are afraid to speak up? Because there is another example of where when you were sexually assaulted, where you did report it, you did go to the hospital.
Yes.
They did say that there was enough evidence for rape, but ultimately there was no prosecution, which I don't understand how that even works.
Yes. First, I think that taking the time to deal with it yourself first, deal with what happened. Think about what did I just walk through? And then, of course, it's your story to tell. But personally, I will say it is better to tell someone. It is better to tell someone and get the help that you need. That time when it happened, then I didn't tell anyone. And I actually there was another instance even between this where I didn't tell anyone either because my head was still in thinking that I opened the door for this. And so I didn't tell either at that other time. And I speak about this in my book. But in that other instance, that person actually got me twice. But in that other instance, that person ended up in jail for rape, for sexual assault. And I believe that person was a minor. And when I look back, I think about had I said something, that person might not have been able to get to this other person. So that's the other part of us speaking up is maybe we can stop the cycle. And so when I did speak up the last time it happened, I remember thinking, okay, this happened to me when I was 20. It happened to me when I was 17. It happened to me when I was 20. I'm 40. I had just turned 40. I'm 40. I'm a nurse. I got my life together. Like, how did this happen again? I was an activist. I was out doing the work to save lives. And I'm like, how did this happen again? At the hands of a pastor, no less. But going to the hospital, I really didn't even get a chance to process it because I called someone as soon as I got away. I didn't think I was going to get away with my life, but I got away and I called someone immediately and told them what happened. They said, come to me. I went to them and basically we ended up going to the hospital. They didn't waste time. They didn't want to hear what I had to say, which is we're going to the hospital, which I'm glad we did. But yes, they did do a kit and it was the most humiliating, humbling, and at the same time, a painful experience to go through getting that kit done. The police showed up to the hospital, walked in the room and showed me the mug shots and said, if you pick the one who I think this is, if you pick him, we're going to go pick him up. And I was like, you're not going to have his picture in that stack. His picture was in the stack. We went through the whole process, but what happened was the perpetrator, he said that it was rough sex. So that's why I had the markings and all of that I had. So that's why I wasn't able to be prosecuted. When he showed up, when the police picked him up, like, I think within 24 hours. They put out a warrant for him immediately. The police picked him up, but he already had a lawyer. Like, that's just how fast he knew. He had a lawyer already and had the exact verbiage. So that's why he wasn't prosecuted.
So many different layers where every single time you were mentioning something, I wanted to comment, but because I wanted to add something there, internalizing the general context, but also blaming yourself. And had I just, or trying to reconcile your own feelings with justifications of, oh, but maybe it wasn't. That is because of a system designed to make us feel that way. The fear that particularly I feel definitely Black women and definitely women of color and minorities. In general, we are told to walk a line and don't disrupt and don't cause waves. But I really think that internalizing that is ingrained in us from when we are young as a system. And I know that so many people feel that way too. So hearing your story and you speaking up so beautifully about this and about something so tragic and awful really is empowering to so many who don't feel that ability to speak up to others about their experiences. The fact that it was a pastor and the fact that you had started looking into faith more and more. Sorry, actually, was that after or before you became a pastor?
That's how we even knew each other, because we were supposed to be working to help the community. It was a group of pastors and he was a part of that group.
Did that shake your faith in any way?
It didn't shake my faith. What it did was it reminded me that everyone who claims God, that doesn't mean that's really how they're walking. That's what it just reminded me of, because even as a pastor myself, I had gone through so many things with other pastors coming up in the church and then becoming a minister before pastoring. I went through a lot just as a woman. So it didn't shake my faith in that way, but it definitely made me hurt for the community in a different way, because it made me think about how this person is supposed to be a leader. And I think that it helped shape me in that way. What type of leader are you? Because if this is someone who is a leader, this is someone who is supposed to be helping bring people to Christ. This is somebody who is supposed to be preaching the gospel and loving people without judgment. But this is someone who's hurting people in this way. So what type of leaders do we have out here, and how much harm are they inflicting on the people they're supposed to be helping? I think that's what shaped me into checking my own self to make sure that I'm the kind of leader that I needed.
Congresswoman, I just want to give a quick shout out about your book, The Forerunner, A Story of Pain and Perseverance in America. And I just want to note for our audience, Congresswoman, if you're okay with it, the first 10 people that email feedback@SumudPod will get a free book.
Oh, wow. Oh, yes.
Okay. Are you okay with that? So
I'm
again,
absolutely okay.
yep. So the first 10 that emails feedback@SumudPod will get a copy of the Congresswoman's book. Speaking of the book, I mean, you know, if I were to look up perseverance in the dictionary, your face would be right there. You've been through it all. You've seen it all, including when you were forced to be evicted from your home due to financial struggles. You actually lived in your car for several months, if I'm not mistaken. Can you go back to that experience and that situation?
We never think that we'll end up unhoused. We don't go through our day thinking one day this will happen to me. So I just wasn't prepared for it. I've been evicted 3 times in my life. The first time I was evicted, that instance where the person choked me and thought that he left me for dead. I was evicted because the landlord said we made so much noise. Him trying to kill me made so much noise that I needed to leave, and he busted the windows out, so they put me out. The next time I had to leave because I got accepted into nursing school early, and I just told my landlord, "Hey, I can't work full time anymore. I'm going to nursing full time. This is a great opportunity. Can I end my lease?" And they said no, and they put me out instead and garnished my wages for it. And then the next time I was put out, it was during the Ferguson protest. And the community that I lived in, the apartment complex, townhome complex, the property management company said that people were afraid I was going to bring the protests to the complex. And so they evicted me. And then when I ended up unhoused, I had just had my second child. She was still an arm baby. She was maybe 3 months old or something. My other child was 1, had just turned 1. He was born premature, 1 pound, 3 ounces. He had been in the hospital for over 4 months. He was in a position to where he couldn't be around a lot of germs. We were still like really trying to like be careful with his health. But we ended up unhoused, living in a car. We never went to a shelter. We didn't go to a shelter because I felt like there are people who don't even have a car. At least I have a car. I can sleep in here. I don't want to take beds away from people who need it that have nowhere to go. We slept in the car. I had a playpen. It's the collapsible playpen that you can fold up. It's portable that you can carry with you. I put that in the back seat of our Ford Explorer. I would open it up and pad it. That's where the kids slept at night. And we had our clothes, all of our belongings in trash bags. And I sat in the front seat. I was working during the day, and at night I would try to sleep a couple hours, but no more than that, because I was afraid that if I went to sleep too long that I would wake up and one of my kids wouldn't be alive, because the temperature would dip so much during the night, because it was late summer into fall when this happened. It was an unbelievable time. People would say to me, "Why don't you go to a food pantry and make sure you have food?" Oh, okay. Go to a food pantry. Where am I putting this food? Where am I keeping the milk? Like, how am I fixing the food? What do you want me to do with the food pantry other than go and ask for some dry goods that I can just eat? You know, it was something how people would just like, "Oh, this is so easy." Oh, is it? I was going into a McDonald's bathroom every day, mixing formula for the day for my baby's bottle. That's where I would go get cleaned up for work, and my job didn't even know that I was living out of the car. I would go to someone's house to iron my clothes for the week and then lay them out on top of the trash bags so that no one would know, so my clothes wouldn't be wrinkled. I didn't sleep for weeks, hour here, 2 hours there. And I remember I had to move the vehicle at night. I couldn't just leave the vehicle sitting in front of someone's house because I didn't want them to call the police. So I would move the car around St. Louis City all night long. I didn't want anyone to call and then the police show up and take my kids. So it was a very trying time.
I just want to reiterate what you said, which blows my mind. That selflessness that you had to say, you know what, I have a car. I'm not going to take up space from someone else or another family in need. Usually it's fight or flight, and we react, and we have to go into protection mode, if you will, for your family. You made a strategic decision. You realized that's just not what the majority of individuals would do, just to be honest, right?
We know now why you did what you did. These conversations and hearing about the various experiences definitely speak to your heart, and continuously getting out of these situations and doing better for yourself despite everything around you is just incredible. You living in the car with the kids and struggling that way. What was the turning point at that point? It's a struggle to find food, struggle to make sure the kids are warm. You're warm. Of course, kids are a priority, but also yourself. I'm sure you're also dealing with so much else going on. What was the turning point that slipped for you?
There was one day where I went in someone's home to iron. I was with my husband at the time. We're no longer married. He wasn't working. So I had gone back to work actually after having our daughter. I went back to work when she was 4 weeks old because we had no money. So I had to go back to work. And so I remember one day we went to someone's home. The person said that we could come in for the night so we didn't have to sleep on the street. And we were so excited, just so happy to be able to come in, even if we were sleeping on the floor, just to come in. And so I brought my clothes and brought the kids' clothes enough to go ahead and iron, like I said. I could hear the person saying to my kid's father in another room, "Y'all can stay, but you better be out before 6:30 when my kids get up." And I was like, wow, how can you say that and be like, I just couldn't, my heart and my head couldn't understand that. And so I barely rested that night. I made sure I started to iron then, and we were out by 6 a.m. I went to actually got a newspaper. There was an ad for this hotel, and it was like an extended stay hotel. And I had been saving money for a few paychecks. I made so little though, but I had been saving money. And so when I saw that they had a special, I'll never forget, I grabbed my pen and I circled it in red. I was like, look, I got enough money for a week to go to this extended stay hotel. We are getting off the street. And so we did. We went to this hotel. It was all I could afford. But we went to this hotel and we got there and we checked in and the place was gross. The place was absolutely gross. There was no way. I would rather sleep in the car. It was something I had never seen before. There was bodily fluids on the sheets, roaches falling from the wall. I remember just sitting there and I was just praying. I was just like, I need you to help. I don't know what else to do. I started to call some other places. I was just thinking, can I get there for 2 days? Can we just, and I remember I called a hotel, an extended stay hotel, and I said, we're at this place, but it is so dirty. Can we just come there for 2 days? Even though I don't have enough money, I will try to get the money. Will you just let us come? And I said the name of the hotel and they said, actually, we can do better. They said, we have a deal that it was one of those where we'll match. It was just for a week, but we'll match if you come to us. We left there. We went to that other place. They ended up matching that deal for the next 5 weeks. We stayed in that hotel for 2 months. I was still working. So from there, I finally told my boss and she found us a place. She had a rental property that was vacant. And so after those 8 weeks or so that we were in that hotel, we had the money to go ahead and to move into that home. And that is how we finally got off the street.
I don't think any guest has almost broken me more than you have, and I'm somewhat happy we didn't do this one in person. Honestly, take a virtual hug from us here. Really, and I honestly don't even know how to pivot away from that conversation, except for your boss that was helpful enough to get you situated.
Yes. Yeah.
Was that really a shift for you and an opportunity to kind of, all right, now it's game time. I got to do something different?
The only thing I said to her was that we were living out of the car because she came up to me and she said, is there something you need to tell me? And I was like, no. And she just looked at me and that's when I told her. She said, okay. And she left and she came back. When she came back, next door to our building was a furniture store. I saw her, I'm sitting in my office. I saw her car pull up. I saw her husband's car pull up. I saw a big pickup truck pull up and they went into this furniture store. I was like, where is she going? Where is she going into the furniture store? I got a phone call that said, I just got some keys from my ex-husband. I just got some keys. We have a place to live. So then I thought about it. I'm like, wait a minute, is she over there buying? And she went over and bought furniture because we had nothing. She fully furnished this 3-bedroom house, 3-bedroom ranch style house in an instant, and came over and brought me keys. And I saw in that moment how one person, it really immediately changed someone's circumstance. I saw it with my dad growing up, but I never got to see stuff like that. I saw somebody get a meal, but the other stuff we didn't get to see as kids. The trajectory of our life in an instant because they made a decision to. And they had the resources to. And so, yeah, got off the street and we were able to be in a comfortable home. But I will say this. I went through a situation. This is why I'm no longer with the spouse that I had at the time. And once we moved into the home, everything was wonderful, but I was with the wrong partner. And that person wanted to take my check and not spend it on the rent, not spend it on the bills, and spend it on other things. And so we ended up having our gas shut off in the winter. So I went and got some heaters. I was plugging up heaters all over the house just to make sure that we stayed warm. And that person that I told you, the one that spoke into me a few years before that and really helped me, she called me one day and she said, "Hey, Cori, I had a dream. I had a dream that your house burned down." It was like, "What? Why would my house?" I said, "No, the house is fine." And she said, "Do me a favor. She didn't know our gas was off. She said, "Do me a favor. When you go home, check your outlets, check your home thoroughly." I said, "Okay." I went home. I checked all the outlets. Everything was fine. But the heater that was in my daughter's bedroom was plugged in. The only outlet was behind her toddler bed. There was nothing. So I said, let me just double check. I pulled her toddler bed out and flames shot out. This was in the evening after I got off work and everything. Had I just put her in the tub and put her in the bed, my daughter would have been stuck in that room with a fire. So needless to say, not long after that marriage was over. But again, we persevered.
Yeah, and it's an incredible story how at certain points or junctures in your life, you've had that one person that seamlessly came out of nowhere, right? Somewhat stood up. And I think that reflects on what you're doing for people consistently. I think that probably serves as a great inspiration to you as well.
Possibly.
Did you go to nursing school around this time as well?
I couldn't go to nursing school during that time because the person I was married to wouldn't allow me to go to nursing school. So as soon as we divorced, that's when I got my apartment on my own and ended up in nursing school when I got evicted. But yes, I went to nursing school not long after that. So I did it with 2 small children. Called my dad, said, "Hey, this nursing school pulled me off the waiting list." It was a 2-year waiting list. They pulled me off the waiting list. I turned in my application in April. They pulled me off the waiting list for the August session. So there was no way I was saying no to that. And I told my dad, I was like, "Hey, I need help." He said, "Come back home. Bring the kids. I'll take care of the kids while you go to nursing school. I will cook for them. I will take care of them. I will do everything. Take them, pick them up from school. Oh, I got them. You just finished nursing school." And that's what he did.
The power, like Ed was saying, the power of the one individual doing it and you becoming that one individual for so many, but it's also reflective of what we're going through now, how we always continuously say, speak up, your silence is complicity, not doing anything to help others actually is a negative. In practice, you just told us what speaking up does, what lending a hand does. And it's no surprise that you did end up becoming a nurse, because helping others and being there for the people in community, with the community, not on the outside, is who you are, clearly. What
Yes.
was nursing school experience like after going through all that? And I think home is home no matter what, and that's beautiful, but you're still going through so much, and now you're on your own in college doing nursing. How was that?
Ooh, I was like 30, I believe. So I was going to nursing school. I started nursing school with people that were 18. And so that was something in itself to go to school. And then that type of nursing school, it's not like regular college because it's not like you all go to different classes. This was the part of nursing school where you're with the same group of people and it carries you through the semesters. And so I'm with this group of folks and I'm not the oldest, but definitely on the older side. And so that was an experience. It was only a few people of color. And they made sure we knew it. The teachers made sure that, I won't say all, some. There were some who, I'll say this later, we found out that one instructor in particular, he let me know, and some of the other students know that I treated you the way that I treated you because I know how you're going to be treated once you start as a nurse. And I need you to have a tough skin. So I needed to weed out those that wouldn't be tough enough. So I understand that it made you feel like I was only coming down on the Black people, that I was only coming down on the brown people, but I was coming down on you because of how much harder it's going to be. And I got it then, but I was like, still, I just wish you wouldn't have treated us the way you treated us. So it was rough. Nursing school was tough. I had already gone to university before. So thinking about just my classes at the other schools that I attended and nursing school was totally different. Unbelievable. You take a test and you got 4 right answers and you have to pick which one is the better answer out of the 4 type deal. It was a lot. I would go to school all day, come home, see the kids, help with homework. And then by 7 p.m., my dad would take them and give them dinner. And I'm up until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning studying and doing homework. My dad, he laughs at this. He would say, you need to go to bed. You need to go to sleep. And I would tell him, I will sleep in 5 weeks when this clinical session is over. When this rotation is over, I'll sleep in 5 weeks. I got a week off. I'll sleep then. Actually, that's how I still am. I am a go, 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 go until, and when can I get a break? I can get a break there. So I'm going to go until then. I'm going to go until I drop. And that's how I am even in movement, even in my activism. I am all about take all the pain, take all the hurt. Let me just take it. If I have to stay in this place of hurt, I'm going to stay in until I know I can get all the way out of it. Even with the Ceasefire Now resolution, when we introduced that, when Rashida Tlaib and I did, when we led on that, we knew we were going into just a very, very violent place as far as like the environment. But it was like, you know what? I call my therapist. Nope. And I'm not telling other people to do that. Don't be like me. But for me, I was like, I'm not calling my therapist right now. I'm not, because she's going to do the work to try to help get me out of this fight place. But then tomorrow I'm going to be right back in. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay here and I'm going to fight in this place. Since I'm sitting in trauma, I'm going to stay here in it until I know I can fully come out of it and get in and be healed. That's just me though. I'm not telling anybody to do that. See your therapist. But yeah, nursing school, it taught me that I was so much better than my circumstances. I ended up actually excelling. I was a freshman. I made the dean's list. I got the top nursing awards. I was the #1 student. So I excelled as soon as I went because I was like, I am getting back to Cori.
And I just want to make it very clear to everybody who's listening, nursing school is not a game. It's not a joke. It's hard. My wife made a pivot later on in her career to nursing as well. And I witnessed firsthand what she went through. I can't imagine what you were going through on top of all of that. And then you have that younger group that you're working with too. They have different priorities. They can maybe have more fun, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I can definitely appreciate that. But I think it raises an important topic of discrimination or racism in healthcare.
Yeah.
And that's something that my wife has seen. She wears a hijab and she's experienced that quite a bit through her career. What did you see? Because nursing school, obviously, your professor was trying to prepare you for it. I don't even think that really prepared you for it because it's really bad out there.
No, it didn't prepare me for it. Hearing him tell me why he treated me the way that he was treating me. I remember I would show up on the day we were having clinicals and we would have 12-hour clinical shifts. Some schools would do 4 hours a day for clinicals at the whole hospital. We would do 12s. And so I would show up at 6 a.m. ready with all of my work. They call it 6 hours of homework is what they call it the night before your first day of clinicals. I would be so ready. I know all 40 of my medications by heart. Like, I would be ready. And he would call on me and I would say something and he would, so you stupid. That's what that means. That's what your answer means. You're stupid. You're the only person here that can't answer a question. Like he would talk to me, well, you're dumb. Like he would, like, that's the way that he would, and other people would cry. I was like, I ain't crying. You can't break me. So I never gave him that, but it was still really tough. But once I graduated and I went into nursing, into the hospital, I was hazed. They call it hazing and they say it's over. I worked on a surgical unit, transplant. The charge nurse will call me out in front of everyone. There's a unit. So you got 30 doctors and surgeons, interns, fellows, everybody standing around with the nurses and physical therapists. It's just everyone. And she would wait until it was just like full. And she would see me coming and she would yell out something. Oh, here comes Miss Lazy, stuff like that. For no reason, they would go tell me would you help me? Would you go turn my pump, my medication pump on this particular setting? So then I'll go do it. And then they'll come back and say, she's trying to kill my patient. It was just so much. And it was directed at me. So one day that charge nurse she yelled out something in front of everyone. And so I yelled back this day. I didn't care if she was my charge nurse. I yelled back. She actually became my friend after that. Nobody spoke to me crazy or wild anymore after that. The surgeons were pretty okay. But I will say one day I was tripped by an attending physician. He walked up to me and he like shoved me and tripped me. And that kind of stuff happened to other Black nurses. There was like a lot of talk about that. That was 15 years ago. Even more recent, before I won my race in 2020, in 2018, 2019, I was working as a nurse on a unit. And I remember being told, we really need you because we're working to diversify the unit and we're working to do better in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we really need your voice, Cori. And we need your expertise. I was a high-tech nurse. Okay, I'll come on. Out of 114 nurses, I ended up being the only Black full-time nurse. 114. I was treated like it as well. I couldn't get anybody to cover my patients for me to go to the bathroom. I would be told the wrong information. I would stand in the hall at the patient's door yelling for help. I need help, pushing the button, and nobody would come. I would go to my supervisors over and over again and tell them how I was being treated. I had nurse come up and say, can you go in and give this patient a bath because I don't know how to do you all's hair. It's a baby. What do you mean you don't know how to do his hair? You wash it. Being told, would you go into that room because people like you all yell too much and you scream over nothing. So you told the family that their baby is about to die. So of course they're screaming and yelling. You don't need to call the police. You don't need to tell me to go check on them and get them to calm down. You need to understand that different cultures respond differently to pain, but to grief. I went through so much. I just remember multiple days just crying in the bathroom.
And what was that moment that you said that, okay, I'm not doing this nursing thing? Was it before Ferguson or after Ferguson?
Yeah, that was before Ferguson. September 2013 is when I left that job. And at that time I was a supervisor. So with all that happened, within 1 year of me graduating nursing school, my supervisor actually promoted me to the weekend nursing supervisor over all of these other nurses. And they were like, what happened? How did she, but I worked my butt off. You want to mess with me? You want to come at me? I'm about to show you who I am. And that's what I did. So for the next several years, I was the supervisor for that shift. But it just got so bad. One day, the breaking point, I walked up to the phone at the nurse's desk and I called my doctor. The nurse answered the phone and I asked her if she would prescribe me some Xanax. And I remember when it came out of my mouth, I said, wait a minute, I just asked her to prescribe me some Xanax so that I can do this job, so that I can calm down enough to be able to work here? No. And that's when I left that job. I said, you know what, never mind. I hung up and I knew it was time for me to do something else. And then that next summer is when Ferguson happened, when Michael Brown lost his life.
I'm going to say it for you, to all those nurses that mistreated you. How do you like her now? But I gotta say it, how do you like her now? That Ferguson experience at the Busboy and Poets event, you told a story of a young man about to be hit by a police officer, and somebody stood in between. And at that moment, you realized that it was a collective effort to stand up against what happened. Can you provide some imagery to that experience?
Yeah.
And I say this because I was having a conversation the other day, and I mentioned Ferguson, and I didn't tell you this, Dana. I mentioned Ferguson, and this individual had no idea what I was talking about.
Wow.
And it takes me back to the Breonna Taylor when you had the apron on the mask. Same thing. Or if you could just provide a little bit more imagery about that event.
This was early on in the protest. I believe this was still August of 2014. By this time, we were experiencing just so much injustice as activists, as protesters on the ground, from being beaten, jailed, dogs were unleashed, ammunition, rubber bullets, just so much. And at night, it was terrifying. But we knew we were fighting for something, so many of us stayed. And so I remember this one night in particular, we were out. There was a lot of people at the protest. There was a police lineup. The police, they were in full riot gear with the shields. And so the police are in the line. I was in the front line of protesters. And so we were all just standing in front of the police chanting. No one was bothering the police. We were just standing there chanting. There was this young Black boy, about 16 years old. All he was doing was saying FTP. Of course, we know the other part. And he's just chanting FTP, and that's all he's doing. This police officer, I guess, didn't like the language. He didn't like what he was saying, and I guess he just got really irritated by it. And so he decided to be violent. He lifted up his baton. He started to bring his baton down. There was this white woman. She probably at the tallest, probably 4'11", very powerful woman. She had been out there with us for most of the time we had been out there during the protest. She was out there every day. She saw the police officer lift the baton because she was on the front line with us. And as he was coming down, she caught that baton in the air. And it was so loud. He was coming down so hard with that baton, you could hear it go when it hit her hand. But she caught it in midair and she just held it. And the officer, I believe, was so stunned that someone did this. They were both just holding it, looking at each other. But she was looking him square in his face. The police officer finally pulled it back and he went away. He didn't harm the young boy. He walked away. And so I learned in that moment that those who are not oppressed in the same way as others should be standing up for those who are oppressed in a way that other person can't. This is not my burden. So I'm able to stand up differently. I'm able to do things differently. I'm able to do more because it's not something that directly impacts me the same. So I learned that in that moment. I tell the story about how there was a delegation that came to the United States from Palestine that came solely to Ferguson to teach us about tear gas. They wanted to teach us about what to do in tear gas, how to put on gas masks, how to deal with the state-sanctioned violence that we were experiencing. And they didn't have to. They came to the United States. A delegation of Palestinians came to teach a bunch of Black people. The majority Black people at the time is who they were talking to. And it blew my mind because at the time I was in this Black girl bubble, just trying to survive, trying to take care of my kids, trying not to get evicted again, trying to pay my bills and trying to make sure that my son and my daughter were not the next hashtag. And I would think about how my son at the time, he was 14, he always would wear a hoodie and he would have on his earbuds. And so he would have this hoodie down and these earbuds on. And I would think about how if the police saw him walking down the street and they wanted to mess with him or they felt he fit the description, and he has these earbuds. He can't hear them. They would think that he's resisting them. Like my son could be next. So anyway, that group decided here it's not us, but we don't want anybody else to experience what we experience. We don't want anybody else to experience occupation, state sanctioned violence, anyone to have to deal with this oppression. And we stopped pouring water on ourselves because they told us how to handle it. We stopped burning because they told us what to do. And not only that, they stayed with us, our Palestinian community, our Arab community, our Muslim community, right there out there with us at night, fighting right there on the front lines.
I've heard so much about Ferguson from Palestinian activists who were there at the time, and the solidarity and the unity and the understanding of what true solidarity and walking next to someone means, and empathizing but not taking over, linking arms or being together. I have so many questions, but to start, first of all, I wish I was marching beside you all. I was watching it from afar, and it was so powerful on so many different levels. But a couple of questions. First, was that the first time you've ever encountered the Palestinian cause, the Palestinian liberation cause, or had you previously been acquainted or had any knowledge of it? And if so, if you did have knowledge, did it change it moving forward?
That was the first time. That was the first time. I just remember in the churches that I belonged to being taught, you stand 100% with Israel. And if you don't, you're standing against God's chosen people. It was like, who wants to do that? I don't want to make God mad. And so we never heard anything other than that, at least where I was going. Never heard anything other than that. So I didn't even know. I grew up and didn't even know what was happening to Palestinians at all, whether in Palestine or in the United States. I did not know. So that was the first time I was introduced to the plight and to the struggles. But because I was introduced, I couldn't act like I wasn't anymore. Like, as soon as I heard, we started to work together and collaborate, and they formed multiple groups. It was Arabs for Black Lives, plus now we have St. Louis Palestine Solidarity Committee. It was just blowing me away that these folks cared so much about what was happening to people who look like me, willing to risk themselves, that I always knew that if they ever needed me, I would be there. Whatever I have to do, I'm going to be there to support. I don't know how. I don't know what to do. I don't know how I can do something in my capacity.
A huge part of the Ferguson conversation on Palestine in particular was the awareness that the police there were also trained by Israel. And their actions and tactics were used against Palestinians forever. So even though the movement in Ferguson and the Palestinians were helping guide on what to do with tear gas and how to organize, etc., from our spaces, it wasn't that far away, the conversation on Palestine, because the oppression there was facilitated by the Zionist State of Israel. These police officers were trained in Israel. And for those who don't know, for the audience who don't know, I highly encourage people to read about the deadly exchange, to learn more about the collaboration between U.S. police and the Israelis. They would go on trips, and they're trained. In fact, they test weapons. It's disgusting. It's unbelievable, and it's everywhere at the state level and at the federal level as well.
Yes.
Did you see Linda Sarsour there with you in Ferguson?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, and I also want to just mention, just wrapping up Ferguson, you had worked to set up a clinic for grief and trauma work.
Yes.
And I think you worked with another organization to set that up as well.
Yes, the organization my father works for, it's an organization that helps to bring equity to the Black community, especially the most marginalized peoples in the community. I was like, we need to provide counseling and just be a help to those, whether it's tear gas. As a nurse, I'm just thinking grief and then like any medical issues. But also where Michael Brown was killed, it was in the middle of an apartment complex. His body laid out on the ground, uncovered for 4 hours. People had to walk past this body because it sat there so long. The people were traumatized. It was like a fishbowl almost. And so you could just see out of your window this body. Kids saw it. And so to leave out of the complex, for some, they needed to go past where the body had laid. And they were just like, no, because the protest had started. buses had stopped, cabs had stopped picking people up. So it was hard for people to get around. So I reached out to this organization and just said, hey, would you all mind providing assistance? So they helped with food and diapers and formula and rental assistance because people weren't able to make it to work. So while we handled the grief and then the medical side.
I mean, it's just, again, fascinating that every churn of your life, your training in nursing helped you with Ferguson, and Ferguson then propelled you to the next phase of your life, which is politics, which if I ever get to meet your dad, I'm going to laugh because you said you never get into politics and you did it. So what propelled you then to say, you know what, you're right, Dad, I'm going into this?
It was not long after the protests had ended. After more than 400 days of protests, we didn't miss one day in 400, even after the cameras left. We knew we needed to continue organizing. So people were thinking about, what do we do next? Some were thinking about organizations where they do work on a police accountability. Some were going into do work with the unhoused. Everybody was like figuring out their thing, going back to work. And so for me, I was trying to figure out mine. And I started to work with some ministry groups, and I just couldn't find my thing. And one day I got a phone call from another activist out of North Carolina who has since been killed. He reached out to me and just said, hey, I need you to do something. I need you to run for U.S. Senate. And I was like, what? Run for U.S. for what? Why? And he explained why he felt that I should run. And I was like, no, I can't do that. I'm not running. By the next day, he had reached out to leaders, local community leaders, elders in the community. They called me early in the morning and said, we need you to run. And so we had the conversation, but I'll never forget when they called me and they said, look, we need you to run. Again, I said no. But as I was saying no, there was this yes that was rising up on the inside of me, almost to the point to where it was about to come out of my mouth. And so I said, you know what, I'm gonna call you back. And so I knew then that I was gonna run. And so the next day I did call them back and I said yes. I had no clue where money was gonna come from. I didn't know how to run for U.S. Senate. I didn't know who was gonna really help. I didn't know anything, but I had to start. And the other thing is I thought about, if my son or my daughter ended up the next hashtag, would I look back and say there was more you could have done, but you were afraid? There was more you could have done, but you felt inferior or inadequate. So just do it. And yeah, so I did. And the rest worked itself out.
You were part of a documentary, Knock Down the House.
Yes.
Correctly, with AOC, I think, was on there as well. What was that experience like, and how much did that actually prepare you?
So I had been on camera so much during the Ferguson uprising, so many documentaries, everybody had a camera, so many media outlets, probably by that point done hundreds of interviews, like literally. So when brand new Congress and Justice Democrats, they had newly formed these PACs. They had newly formed and they decided to work together to help regular everyday people to win Congress that were progressives, that believed in the values we believe in. And they had us to all come together. I believe we were in Tennessee, and to come in and to do seminars, to do like fake media interviews, that kind of thing. It was really like a training camp weekend. So I went, I met all of these other candidates. That's where I met Alexandria. And it was pretty intense, but it was great. But there was this camera. There was this camera, and the woman walked up and she just said, hey, I just want to feature you in a film that I'm doing. And so if you don't mind. And that's where I met the director. I didn't care because I had been on camera so much, like whatever. She actually ended up doing what she said, and she followed us for the next several months. We didn't think the movie was going to go anywhere. It was a documentary. It was one woman with a camera in a room. So you don't think it's going to end up on any big screens or anything like that. But it turns out that it did. And even though my story is a little strange in the way that it is portrayed, but ultimately it helped me to be in that film, because even though I lost that race, so many people across the world saw that film. We went to other countries to do different events around the film. We were supposed to be up for an Oscar, The film was a big deal. We won at Sundance Film Festival. And so the buzz around my name and then Bernie Sanders really stepping up for me, it really helped people to see she's not only an activist, because that's what people tried to say. Oh, you're only an activist. You can't govern. You're only an activist. You can't lead in politics. It started to help people to see me in a different light. And I believe that was one of the things that helped me to win the race.
When did you know, or did you know at some point before the actual election, you know what, I think this is going to happen? Or did you never have that feeling at all?
I knew, I'd say probably around that February, I just knew. And I could see, I literally could close my eyes and see me finding out that I won. I could literally see it. I could see what I had, what I was going to wear. I could see everybody crying and shouting in joy. And so I just believed it in my heart. And so that's how I operated out of the next several months. But I will say this, COVID happened. And I did an event for Bernie Sanders. He came to St. Louis because he was still running for president. And he came to St. Louis. We did this big event. I introduced Bernie Sanders. And it was just so amazing. Oh, it was just such a great, the momentum and the energy. That ended up being his last presidential rally, a campaign rally, because everybody started to shut down. It was maybe 10 to 14 days after I had COVID. And I have asthma. So COVID knocked me down for months. I couldn't work. I couldn't take care of myself for the most part. I had been in and out of the hospital. It was really rough for me. And people were saying, you need to get out of the race. You need to stop running because you can't really campaign. It was just really bad. That happened in March. I didn't start to get better until June. The election was in August, but I kept running. I would be on calls, Zoom calls. That was how I was speaking because I was so sick. I had my hair wrapped up because I couldn't do my hair, but I was determined because what I kept saying was, this situation with me is temporary, but the lasting harm that will happen to the people of this district, of this country, if we don't get the change that we need, if we don't get a Medicare for all, if we don't get in, and I just started going through the different issues, if we don't get the change that we need, that lasting harm that will just be so destructive for our people. And so that's why I kept running. And so staying in the race panned out because I won.
I want to ask, as soon as you won, did you make your kids call you Mommy Congresswoman, or was that like the new name? No?
Absolutely not. Those kids, it's just mom. It's just Venmo, Cash App, and FaceTime mom.
Probably the hardest job for us, I think, and the most rewarding and most beautiful is mom. So you made it into Congress, and that was amazing. And your first, or one of your first, was the Unhoused Bill of Rights. I'm always fascinated by the decisions of newly elected officials, how they decide which bills to choose to introduce first. So this speaks for itself. After this interview, we know from personal experience, but also from interactions. Tell us about how you came to the decisions of the various bills you introduced and why you chose to introduce them.
So my very first bill, 3 days after I was sworn in, was the insurrection on the U.S. Capitol. I didn't even have a panic button yet. We didn't have water in the office. We were still just moving in, and the insurrection happened. I was able to get out of the gallery and make it back to my office by the time they breached the doors of the Capitol. So I was able to be safe in that way. My staff and I, we barricaded ourselves in the office. And so I sat there and wrote my first bill, which was a bill to investigate and expel any members of Congress who participated in the deadly insurrection. So that one was because I was looking at what was happening outside. But then after that, just taking it, like you said, from my own experience and just thinking about the holes, thinking about where we miss people, and being someone who used to wonder, why aren't people speaking to my issues? As a single parent that's trying to do all that I can, and I keep coming up short. Like, why aren't people talking about us? They keep talking about the middle class. And if you help the middle class, then you help everybody. I wasn't middle class at the time. I wasn't feeling the help. So that's where it came from. So the Unhoused Bill of Rights, I used to do a lot of work on the ground for the unhoused community. And I would be out late at night, helping to get people to find some type of shelter for people, or just bringing them blankets, bringing them food if we couldn't get them into a shelter, picking people up off the ground that had OD'd on K2 or some other drug, working as a nurse, like literally out there on the ground, helping to keep people alive. And so that's what it was about. And I would think about the times when sometimes all we had was to help get this person to one of the grates on a downtown street where the heat was coming up out of the grate. And all we could do was get them there because they couldn't go into a shelter. So we got them to a grate where they could lay on top of the grate and stay warm. Or they had a bench where, where they could stretch out and try to get some sleep. And we could stay right there in the car and watch them lay there and sleep for a little while, just to give them a break so they would feel some type of safety. So we could sit there and watch them sleep. Then the city decided to put up hostile architecture. So you can't lay down on the bench anymore. They put spikes on the grates so you can't lay on the grates anymore. So that's what that bill was about. I started to think about the things that were just some of the basic low-hanging fruit things that we could do. Our unhoused community deserved to have rights, and they deserve to have it spelled out. And then this was also a framework, and this was other legislation too, like my Reparations Now legislation. Some of this legislation was so that localities, municipalities, that states could take from it and build from it on their own. Like it was a framework for them to be able to create their own legislation as well.
I think it's important to talk about the various different things that you spoke about. Ed, I'm just going to jump in here just because you mentioned it. Please talk to us more about reparations, because I think the audience don't all know what that means and where you're going with it. I think it's so crucial.
Sure. I wrote a bill called the Reparations Now Resolution. This resolution is legislation that calls on the United States federal government to take accountability for the transatlantic slave trade, for what happened on the outcome of it, and then how the U.S. participated in the transatlantic slave trade and chattel slavery. For those that don't know, me personally, my ancestors, the only reason Cori Bush is in the United States is because my ancestors on both sides of my family were at one point in Africa, and they were enslaved, forcibly removed from their countries, put on ships, stacked up on top of each other with very little food for months. Sometimes it would take months for them to find land. But the brutality, chained against your will, families torn apart because you oftentimes you didn't get to stay with your family. They would separated families. And then they were brought to the United States, brought to different countries, but as far as the United States is concerned, brought to the United States from basically 1619 until slavery was abolished. And what that ended up looking like was Africans who had their own language, their own culture, and had their own homes. And we're not talking about people who were enslaved in their homes. We're talking about people who had their own lives, who were, whether they were farmers or whatever they did as free in their home, now they were enslaved in this country. And basically one major point of it was to grow the U.S. economy. Very briefly, from 1619 to roughly 1865, the U.S. economy grew so much through this forced labor. Our ancestors were, from children to adults, we were sold, brutalized, raped, beaten, malnourished, lynched, hung, killed in very brutal ways through those years. 222 million hours of slave labor is what is calculated as how much enslaved Africans gave to this country, to the tune of what would be today over $97 trillion. And so basically the cotton and the rice and the soy, so much of how the U.S. became such a global leader, a global economic power, was through this labor. And so what we're saying is the United States never fixed that. The United States never fixed the harm that they caused. You stole the whole people from their land and then treated them terribly in this country. And so the debt is owed. And so we're asking the United States to acknowledge that debt and then give actual money to the descendants, as well as helping with housing and healthcare and all the areas where we've been discriminated against in this country, where also there are those areas where white people were giving a helping hand in those areas to make sure that there was supremacy over the Black population.
I mean, there's a way to fund it. How much do we give to Israel every year?
Period.
Yeah. I do just want to step back during your first week or so of Congress. Did I read correctly? I just wanted to make sure I mentioned this earlier, that you were wearing a mask.
Yes.
Obviously, COVID. You had Breonna Taylor's name on it. Did other members of Congress actually think that was your name?
So it was orientation before I was sworn in. It was the first day, and we had all showed up. And I was told before I came, I was told from some other members of Congress, Cori, we know who's coming, because Marjorie Taylor Greene was in my class, Lauren Boebert. And so we were told, like, don't go into this feeling like I can't talk to these people or being in a silo. Go in and just meet everybody and just learn as much as you can learn. So that's where my mind was. So I'm talking to people, and there were some Republicans who came up to me. We were all just milling around and just like saying hello. This was before the very first meeting started. So they're walking up to me. Hey, Breonna. Hey, Breonna, my name is such and such. So that was the second one. My name is Cori Bush. Breonna. So by number 4, I just had to let it go. And so I said, you mean to tell me that none of you know who Breonna Taylor is? You mean to tell me that you are walking up to me and you all are talking about these issues and you don't even know about? I just went on the next day. I guess they heard about it. They came up and made it clear. Hi, Cori. Yeah, we know who Breonna Taylor is. Yeah, we believe that she was treated unfairly, that what happened to her was wrong. And,
And these are the individuals making decisions.
and that's what I said.
It's amazing, really. It's not surprising, given that it keeps happening and that people, not just the minority, not just the Black and brown people, should be rising up. Everybody should be rising up. And yes, the movement has grown. So to be fair to so many who have joined the movement, but I feel like the media is pretty complicit. At some point, you co-sponsored many bills and you led on many bills. I know we want to get to Palestine because this is so important, but I think it's also important to show the diversity in your approach. In the short period of time you were in there, and I wish we can get you back in there. So that's good to do. But the ERA is another big one for me. Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about this, if you don't mind, and then how it ended right now.
The Equal Rights Amendment this year, on my birthday, actually, in July, will be 102 years old. The Equal Rights Amendment is very clear that basically no one has the right to discriminate against you on the basis of sex. The fact that women are able to be discriminated against in this country still today, after people just having a brain to say, you know what, that's not right, but also 100 years of organizing. So the Equal Rights Amendment, there have been groups for decades that have worked on this. The states have done their part. The 38 states that were needed ratified the Equal Rights Amendment, which was what Congress said needed to happen. Congress did their part. Everything was laid out to make the Equal Rights Amendment law. We did all of that through the years. Virginia, being the last state, finalized everything for us. The Equal Rights Amendment was supposed to be, at that point, the 28th Amendment. So organizing continued to happen. There was another member of Congress who was leaving Congress. She was unseated, and she came to me and she said that she wanted me to lead. She wanted me to take the bill. She was the sponsor of the Equal Rights Amendment legislation. And so I decided that I needed to do some organizing around the bill. I can't just take this bill. I need to organize. And so I just decided, not only am I going to be the first Black woman to ever carry this legislation, even though Black women and other women of color have led on the Equal Rights Amendment for decades, nobody talks about our work. But I said, as the first Black woman, alongside Ayanna Pressley, founded the first Equal Rights Amendment caucus in the United States Congress. And within a few short months, I think about 3 months, we became the 5th largest caucus in the United States Congress. Out of hundreds of caucuses, we grew super fast. And we were able to get so much work done, so much organizing with groups. Just saying that, hey, like, women, we still do not have parity in so many areas. And we look at wage discrimination. making less than our white male counterparts simply because we're Black or brown or we're Asian. Like, we need to fix that. The fact that we carry so much more money, we carry so much student debt. Women carry the most student debt in the country. Just thinking about all the ways that we're discriminated against and we're harmed, sexual harassment in the workplace. We just need those protections. And so that's what the ERA is about, making sure that we have the protections, but for women in all genders, every gender, so no one can be discriminated against across this country. And so finally, when Joe Biden was about to leave office, a lot of pressure, we did a lot of work. He did come out and declare that the Equal Rights Amendment, for the first time in 102 years, is the 28th Amendment. It hasn't been published yet. He didn't push to have it published so we can see it in the Constitution yet. We're still working to get that done, but he did at least declare it law.
Yeah, and that's thanks to your work. I mean, I think declaring it is one thing, but all the work that has been done before it is what needs to be at the forefront of this, to be fair. I do want to insert a small story here where we met. You had such an impact on me, and I realized the extent to which you are willing to put yourself out there for Palestine, Palestinian rights, and Palestinian liberation. Of course, before then, there were conversations, and you were present in Congress, and you did stand up, and you did speak out. But for me, was when we were working on the Nakba event, the 76th year anniversary of the Nakba event. Yes. And for those who don't know, there was a bunch of organizations that started an effort to educate Congress members about the Nakba. It was a long-term effort, working really hard, and then Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib joined the effort, and it grew, and we had a location for it, and everything was great on the Hill, and they kept canceling, making up reasons, not allowing us in this room and not allowing us in that room. Finally, Senator Bernie Sanders coordinated with the Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, and we ended up having it in his committee. And even though the event was to educate Congress people, not a single member of Congress showed up to that event, except one, and that was you. And not only did Representative Cori Bush show up, you stayed the whole time, you engaged, you were very much present to listen and to absorb what was being said. And at the very end, you stayed and you spoke to us, and you welcomed the conversation. And to me, that was honestly the first time that I felt I was heard in Congress, and first time I felt that there's hope really in politicians, really, truly. So that was my really powerful moment, meeting you that day and giving you a hug. And that was actually in May 2023. That was before the genocide started.
Yes.
From there to the start of the genocide, you continue to speak up, but then you and, of course, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib introduced the Ceasefire Resolution. Talk to us a little bit about that and the process and how you all were feeling, and, of course, the amazing protest that you all did with the signs, holding them up in session.
It takes me back to Ferguson, and when I said, these folks are standing up for us and they don't have to. So when they need us, when they need me, I'm going to be there. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how. But I never stopped working with those groups. I never stopped standing up or speaking out for Palestine or our Arab community. When the Muslim ban happened, I was out there with my bullhorn, pretty much a no-brainer. So during the Ferguson protests, the frontline activists called me Mama. Like, they called me Mama or Pastor Cori. Those are my names. And part of what I was always trying to do was save them from something, trying to stop them from being harmed. And just even video of me doing just like the police is coming to pepper spray somebody in their face or something, or coming to hit someone, and I jump over them like this. That's what was in my mind when we heard of the ground invasion that Netanyahu was talking about. It's going to happen over the weekend. And I was trying to figure out how to do this, how to cover the Palestinian people, how to cover the people of Gaza. And I couldn't figure out what that looked like. I kept trying to figure out, what is that? Like, how do you cover them? And I couldn't figure it out because I couldn't be there. And even if I was, like, what could I do? The ceasefire resolution, when it came to me to see if I would even think about introducing a resolution, it was a no-brainer. Absolutely. But the conversation was between Rashida and I just said, are you sure? I said, you don't have to carry the burden of this. Your mother is trying to get to the United States. She's in the West Bank. You're dealing with so much right now. Your family, you're the only Palestinian American in the Congress. You don't have to bear the brunt of this if you don't want to. If you want to be on the front and lead this, then I will stand right behind you or next to you. But if you don't want to, then I got it. I said, I will do it. I said, I will lead on this, and you just tell me what to do. You tell me, I don't want to get in front of all of this because I understand what that's like. I don't want to do that. You just tell me what you need. And so that's how we introduced the legislation. And we worked with some other groups. We worked with some other members of Congress who were very upset with us that I called to be a part of us introducing, very upset, saying that how dare we introduce a ceasefire resolution. You're being insensitive. This is a really critical moment. The vitriol that was being hurled at us was unbelievable. But we stood strong. For those members of Congress that wanted to join in, we took those folks. We wanted more, but that we took what we had and we introduced. And I remember the day we introduced the legislation, within 24 hours, I had so many death threats that came into my office alone, not even on social media, just to my office. So many death threats that I had to evacuate my St. Louis office and close it down for a week. I was afraid. First, I wanted to take care of my staff. I care for their safety, but I was concerned that someone would do something thinking I was in the building, and I was in DC. So we shut the office down. And yes, we went through a lot, but every time it started to get heavy, I went back to that, what I said before, that fight, keep going, stay in it, just endure. That's how I got through that. And then even with the State of the Union, the day of the State of the Union, I knew there was no way that we were going to back down, even though the administration was against us for the most part. And all we had was each other. We started a whole row in Congress. I call it squad row now. We didn't have that before, but we would sit together in Congress because just to have that family, just to have somebody who supports you sitting with you. So I remember I was sitting in my office and I was thinking, I was like, if President Biden says something about sending more aid to Israel to bomb babies, what can we do? What can we do? We can't you can't yell. What if the mics don't pick up if we're yelling, or if just didn't know what we could do that would really make a difference or that people would be able to see. And so I thought about my protest days. What do you do to protest? You bring a sign. But I was like, okay, how do I get a sign that's small enough to where I can get it in on the floor, where I can make sure that I get it in? And so I told my staff, hey, make me a sign that they then turned into a fan. It was supposed to be a sign. It was a small sign on a stick. The way that they made it, it turned into a fan. I just said what I wanted. It was about 4:00, I think. I had to be on the floor at 6 for the State of the Union. I said at 4:00, I want some signs. My staff took that, walked out of the room, went and made some signs, had someone print them up. They went and pulled interns and cut everything and made enough for squad. And then came back and was like, see? So I smuggled them into the floor. And I remember I was sitting on the row and I was trying to pass them down. Nobody would see. And then even the media, I didn't want them to see yet either. I didn't want anyone to come up and say, oh, you can't have those, because then we really were going to have an issue because I wasn't going to give mine away. So anyway, and we just held them for a while. Rashida was like, just wait, we'll know the right moment. I was very clear, we all just decided to wear our keffiyehs. We all just said, hey, I'm wearing my keffiyeh. Oh, you weren't? Okay, I'm wearing one too. And then there's one picture of me helping Summer put on, Rashida and I were helping her put on her keffiyeh because it kept falling off of her because of her outfit. So we were in the chambers of the U.S. Capitol on the House side, keffiyeh going like this. It was amazing. Amazing.
You just gave me goosebumps. That's really amazing.
We made it. We pulled it out.
So amazing and historic. You all trailblazed on that. Really incredible. One of my friends, when I told them that we might have you on the show soon, they said her courage and honesty is deeply missed and needed on the current stage of US politics. And what resonated with them in particular was that even though AIPAC had a major hand in taking you down, and the Israeli lobby as a whole, Israeli Zionist lobby as a whole, did have a hand, you told them in defiance in an interview, AIPAC, I'm coming for you. And this person said that they believe you and they can't wait to see you back in Congress.
I said it after I found out I lost on the stage in my speech. I said, AIPAC, I'm coming to tear your kingdom down. I meant that. If it was the NRA, I would have said NRA. If it was crypto, I would have said crypto, big pharma, whoever. It was AIPAC. Yeah, some money came from crypto, some money came from big real estate, some money came from other areas, but it was primarily AIPAC. So that's why I said AIPAC.
And that was the second most expensive primary. Is that
In
accurate?
U.S. history.
And
Yes.
AIPAC spent what, $9 million?
They spent about somewhere around $9 million, but total with everything that they helped to organize and the other groups, it came out to about $15 million.
Wow.
Yeah, and with Bowman before Representative Cori was about like 14 million or something. It had spent to oust him as well for speaking up.
So we believe you. We know that they're on your radar. We know you're going to get them. And speaking of that, we could actually pivot to your PAC and how we can support you. If you could talk about it, I want to make it very clear for the audience. I already told you, and I'll be donating as well to make sure that we support you and get you back. I believe we got to get you in for president, but we can talk about that later. But how do we support
Rub out God's ears.
There you go. So how do we support you? What can we do? Where can we go?
So I started a PAC called Politivist Action. I coined the term politivist, politician and the activist. I was not taking off my activist hat to be in Congress because I believe we need people who will bring the moxie and the courage and the fight, the perseverance. And we need to connect that to the person with the power of the pen and the power of the purse. And that has that bully pulpit. And we see in this moment what happens when we don't have enough people like that in positions of power. So I started a PAC because whether I run for office again or not, let me be clear, I do plan to run for office again. What that date looks like, I'm not totally sure. We pulled together this PAC to be able to raise money so that there is an infrastructure for me to be able to run for office again, but also not just for me, for my friends who we know AIPAC is coming for. We know they're going to come for Summer Lee. They're going to come for Ilhan Omar, most likely. They're going to probably come for Rashida Tlaib. I want to be able to help them. And I want to look for other people who are activists, who want to be politicians as well, that just don't have the money to be able to run, to be able to help them to do some recruitment all over the country. So that is what this PAC is for. We were just starting out, but we want to do great work. We want to do big work. We want to be able to be in this moment, what is needed for the next moment. We don't want to wait until the next moment to be that. We want to be in place to be able to take care of our communities. That's what we'll do. So we would love it if folks would donate. It's unlimited what you can donate because it is a PAC and the type of PAC that it is. So send me wherever I'm going next and help keep great people and put great people in these positions. Let's switch out some folks.
Yes, and overturn Citizens United and make some serious reform for corporations and involvement of dark money in the process.
We need to do that ASAP.
Absolutely.
ASAP.
If everybody goes to coribush.org, I believe they'll be able to donate. And again, you mentioned Congresswoman, they can donate any amount.
Yes. Yes. And I do agree. We need to get the money out of politics. Trust me. I just know how $15 million took me out. We can't fight that if we don't have, there's no way. If I ran for office again, I know if they can come up with another 15 million, there's no way that I could run.
Speaking of that really quick, did AIPAC ever approach you and say, hey, back off or else or anything like that?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Years ago, when I first started running for office, they did. They sent multiple people to me. And then after I won, I just wasn't changing my stance. So then when I was running in 2020, they still kept sending people to me. from politicians in my community. They would have them come try to talk to me, clergy to try to come talk to me, just all of these different folks, business leaders in the community to come talk to me. I just wasn't going to change my stance. The last thing that was said to me, because nothing else has been said to me from AIPAC in 4 years, the last thing that was said to me was right before I was sworn in. I was told, we know that you're not going to change your views. We just ask that you be silent. Just don't say anything about it. Otherwise, if you choose not to be silent, then you will have a tumultuous beginning to your tenure in Congress.
We definitely want to support you, and we thank you so much. I'd like to leave the final words to you. What would you like for our audience to know? What would you like to say to those young individuals who look up to you, who aspire to be like you? Any final words for them?
Yeah, the fight is within you, and there is no age. There are no restrictions on fighting for freedom other than loving humanity. You just love humanity first. And when you love humanity, that means that there is nothing that anyone can do to make you not love them. There's nothing that you can do. And we just fight, show up, whatever that thing is. Not everybody is a frontline protester. That is okay. We need people in boardrooms. We need people in the hospitals. We need people in the schools. We need people at the library. We need people on the street. We need people in every seat, every single area, every single industry, every single sector. We need people that believe that we all must come together. It's going to take us to actually get the freedoms that we seek. And so when we speak up for Palestine, when we speak up against the occupation, when we speak out against the devastation and destruction that has happened to the people of Gaza, when we speak out and we make sure that our voices are heard, we're not just speaking out for those people who are there right now. We're speaking out for the generations and the legacies that's coming behind them. We're speaking way beyond the right now. And so that's who you are. You are an influencer. You are changing the world when you do that. So get connected and understand too that our struggles are interconnected. So as you fight for Gaza, you're fighting for Black folks. As you fighting for Black folks, you're fighting for the brown community. You fighting for brown community, you fight for our Asian community. As you're fighting for women's rights and bodily autonomy, that you're fighting for kids at the border. Understand that it is all interconnected, and we will fight white supremacy wherever it rises its ugly head. So stand up, stay strong, don't be afraid, have the courage that's on the inside of you, push past yourself and be that change.
Amazing. That young advocate and activist that I told you about that gave you that message, they also said that you are their hero. And I think those words resonate as well. What you just said is extremely powerful. Amazing message. Thank you so much, Representative Cori. You are a treasure.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all for this podcast. This was awesome.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for Sumud.